Salam alaikum. Bonjour à tout le monde. Alors, je dois vous remercier pour revenir après le déjeuner. Alors, après une matinée qui était vraiment chargée avec beaucoup de débats et beaucoup d'échanges. Mais c'est bien, je pense que c'est le chef du terrain. On va procéder vers la troisième table ronde. C'est en fait pour évaluer les étapes critiques dans l'entrée du Maroc dans l'espace de finance islamique. Alors, il y a trois intervenants avec moi. La liste, vous voyez ici, malheureusement n'est pas vraiment tout à fait représentative des personnes. M. Jaffal se trouve déjà dans le programme, donc vous pouvez lire qui c'est. Madame Stella aussi. Alors c'est M. Stella qui vient nous joindre. Lui, il est d'origine indienne avec 18 ans d'expérience dans la finance conventionnelle et avec 15 ans d'expérience dans la finance islamique, surtout au sein du Qatar Islamic International Bank. Donc il a participé en fait dans le développement de la finance islamique au sein des pays du Golfe. Et là, actuellement, il travaille pour une fondation qui a été créée aussi par la même banque. Mais cette fondation qui s'appelle Islamic, en fait, est faite pour financer les activités d'une façon islamique, les activités du PMO-PMI. Et il est au Maroc, en fait, pour sonder un peu le marché. Donc, s'il y a des acteurs qui s'intéressent à ce sujet, vous pouvez le voir plus tard. Donc, je veux la table ronde. Je donnerai maximum 3 minutes à chaque intervenant pour faire un discours général à propos du sujet du table ronde. Et puis après, ensuite, on va poser des questions spécifiques à chaque intervenant. Et je vais ouvrir la séance pour les questions et réponses. Monsieur Jaffal.
Bonjour à tous, donc déjà je suis ravi d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui pour parler de deux sujets qui me tiennent à cœur. D'un côté mon pays le Maroc et de l'autre la finance islamique. Donc pour commencer, on va d'abord parler de la finance islamique. C'est une industrie qui n'a plus à faire ses preuves aujourd'hui. On a vu la résilience qu'elle a eue et puis son potentiel de développement lors des 10 dernières années alors que d'autres industries étaient en train de s'effondrer. Et donc, d'un autre côté, nous avons le Maroc. Le Maroc, pays en pleine expansion économique, qui sort d'une transition démographique, et qui a donc beaucoup de besoins, des besoins d'infrastructures, qui vont de l'immobilier aux énergies renouvelables, en passant par tous les besoins logistiques, les autoroutes, les aéroports. Donc, qui dit besoin d'infrastructure, dit besoin de financement. Donc, ajouter à cela une population qui est musulmane à plus de 95%. Tous ces éléments vous laissent penser que Casablanca et donc le Maroc a toutes les aptitudes pour devenir un réel hub de la finance islamique en Afrique et même dans le monde. Donc, nous avons une grande opportunité qui se présente aujourd'hui. Par contre, comme on sait tous, les opportunités s'accompagnent souvent de défis. Et la finance islamique ne fait pas exception à la règle. Donc, il y a des défis à relever pour pouvoir installer une finance islamique saine dans notre pays. Donc, nous allons essayer de voir durant cette table ronde comment les expériences internationales peuvent nous aider à relever ces défis, à les maîtriser, en commençant par les aspects charia, et en nous intéressant ensuite aux acteurs internationaux, aux aspects réglementaires, et l'influence qu'ils peuvent avoir sur l'industrie de la finance islamique au Maroc. Voilà.
Merci, M. Jaffal. Could you please just give us 2-3 minutes of your general view about the critical steps towards Morocco's position in the Islamic finance space? So just give us some general view on things, and then we will move on to more specific.
Am I connected? Switch on or? Is that better? Hopefully you can hear me now. I'm not a very technical woman, and I should also apologise most profusely that my French is at best inadequate, and probably at worst somewhere near appalling. So I thank everybody for taking the time to listen this afternoon, and to the translators for their kind assistance as well. And looking at what's happening here in Morocco, as Farouk has said already, I come from a UK background, although I have worked personally in the Islamic financial services space for the best part of the last 30 years. I started young. And it's been interesting to see the expansion of the global footprint. And as we heard this morning, there are one or two, maybe a few territories that consider themselves to be hubs of the industry. In the Middle East, we've grown accustomed to a number of different jurisdictions. Bahrain, which for a long time was the centre and probably hosted the biggest number of Sharia-compliant banks. More recently, we have had Dubai come to the fore and restate its credentials. Out in Southeast Asia, we have Malaysia, which I think many accept as being perhaps the most sophisticated in its state of emergence out of a number of the hubs, because it has really developed its infrastructure quite significantly. And then we have our good selves back in the UK. I think most of you are aware from the comments of Farouk and others this morning that we seek to be a Western hub for Islamic finance, and I'll address what's been going on in the UK a little bit later. But what is particularly interesting at the moment is that there are a number of different territories and jurisdictions that are stating their own credentials. And quite often this is driven by domestic requirements and domestic impetus, and not necessarily a desire to provide service and capability to the entire world, but to look firstly on what's available or what's needed at home and in the closer region. So that's quite interesting. The week before last I was in Istanbul, and I've been watching very closely the developments in the Turkish market. Of course, for those of us that read the Islamic financial press, will think that everything is glowing and glorious in Turkey and they've made great strides in the last 2 to 3 years. Indeed they have, but a lot of that development has been in respect of inbound financing requirements and also the capital markets. Separately, Turkey has a special sector of 4 participation banks which operate strictly in compliance with Sharia, and for the past 15, 20 years their progress has been rather slower, but it's been equally important, and perhaps we can reflect upon that. So the proposition for Morocco is indeed one that I'm very interested in, and why I was eager to join you today. Firstly, because although I'm based in the UK and I'm part of the UK government task force for developing Islamic financial services, I'm here to be educated, to find out what Morocco needs, and to also look and compare that to experiences that we're having at home and that you may be having here, and that others have had overseas as well. And I think that's the basis of my approach to this panel session.
Thank you, Stella. Very insightful. Thank you very much. We'll come more. We'll come back to more in-depth discussion on these subjects. With that, can I ask you to just talk for general topic for 2 to 3 minutes, and then thank you.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Talhaj. As told you, I have been in the banking industry for the last 33 years, of which 15 years in Islamic banking and 18 years in the conventional. So I have worked in India, I have worked in Oman, in 2 banks, and then I worked in Qatar for 10 years. I worked in one of the largest brokerage houses in the International Financial Center. Now we are in Stella, which is looking to finance SMEs, small and medium businesses, as well as microfinance. Now, if you look at overall the impact of Islamic banking in many countries, you must have noticed that not only in the Muslim countries, just go by religion or one, but in some non-Muslim countries also, Islamic banking has started making its inputs. We, Qatar International Islamic Bank, from 10 years back, when we started Islamic Bank of Britain, in the beginning there were a lot of reluctance from even our own people that no, it won't be possible in Britain to work, or maybe the regulators they may not agree, or there might be some other challenges over there. But ultimately, when we tried now, you can see that in UK itself, there are a few more Islamic banks have started work. Thereafter, Singapore Monetary Authority, they wanted to learn from the experience, and then they gave a license to Islamic Bank of Asia. Thailand, a Buddhist country, there are already 4 Islamic banks working over there. Similarly, many other jurisdictions, they are working on Islamic banking and studying about Islamic banking, and they are considering to give licenses either to the vendors or full-fledged Islamic banks. Interestingly, one of the GCC countries which has been resisting a lot about the Islamic banking was Sultanate of Oman. Because I worked there for 13 years, and there was a time that not even a single bank or single private entity could not operate in accordance with Sharia principles. But then, as Stella mentioned just now, it depends upon the demand of the people and how much the population wants and what are the needs of that particular section of the society. And then ultimately, in 2 years, the government, they realized that the people, they want Islamic banking, they permitted not only Islamic vendors, but full-fledged Islamic banks as well. So now there are 2 Islamic banks which are full-fledged, Bank Nizwa and Police Bank, and almost all the banks, they are having Islamic vendors. Within this 2 years itself, one of the largest banks, which is Bank of Muslim, their portfolio has gone almost 20 times within this period of 2 years itself. So similarly, now Syria, my colleague he was mentioned that Syria International Islamic Bank, we opened some about 5-6 years back, and in the beginning we had some problems, but now it has been, there had been very sustained growth. Similarly, in Morocco, what I can see that maybe there are certain apprehensions, maybe there may be certain bottlenecks in the beginning, but as you learn from the experience itself, and you learn from the experience of the market practitioners, definitely more and more knowledge will develop, and hopefully all the things will be clear to the authorities also, and it will pave the smooth way for functioning of Islamic banking industry.
Thank you, Mr. Talha. Okay, now we will go into more in-depth of the session, the points that we have to cover, and I'm afraid I'm going to start with you. As you have quite a wide experience in the Islamic finance space, and currently you're based in Qatar, you have worked in Qatar Islamic Bank for many years. Now, Qatar is a specific example of Sharia compliance, I would say, due to the fact that the Qatar Central Bank allowed the conventional banks to have Islamic windows within the existing institutions, but then after a few years, all of a sudden, there was a decree, and they actually asked them, they gave them less than 1 year actually to wind up their business, and they gave them the choice either to convert fully into Islamic or to sell their business to other, fully fledged Islamic. So now, as we speak today, Qatar is one of those countries where actually either there will be a fully conventional bank or there will be a fully Islamic bank. There is no such thing as Islamic window. Now in Morocco, and I think more widely in the north African region, one of the big question marks that we have as we are moving along the lines is that whether Islamic windows should be allowed or they shouldn't be allowed. So I have seen less of this question actually in Morocco at this point in time. However, we are in touch with the Tunisian central bank and the government, the Ministry of Finance, and they have actually stumbled over this main question. So, and many other countries are also looking in the same direction, and they are not fully understanding which way they need to go. From a Sharia compliance point of view, so what model is actually better is taking into account the requirements of Sharia compliance, but also other requirements. For example, if you set up a completely new Islamic bank, as in Oman, for example, then there will be fresh capital required, there will be a whole lot of things, and how it's going to impact the business in a country like Morocco. So would you like to share this experience with us, telling the audience that, how did it happen in Qatar, and how do you see that happening in Morocco? So what is actually better for Morocco and the North African markets?
Thank you very much. It's a very good question, in fact. See, Qatar has been, I would say that first Islamic banking started in Dubai itself, in Dubai Islamic Bank. And then Qatar has also been one of the pioneers in Islamic banking. What had happened in Qatar that after Qatar Islamic, then Qatar International Islamic, then Masr Rayan and other banks, then they came. So some of the people, they started saying that, look, might impact some local market, or some said no, it is not right, that one might be selling conventional products also, and on the other hand, Sharia compliant also. But the fact is, nobody exactly knows what the reason was for central bank to come up for this decision. Virtually, there was no problem. These Islamic banks were also working, as well as conventional banks were also working. Now, coming to the question that what could be the best to do? So the best to do is we have to understand one simple formula. That the product, what is Islamic banking product? The Islamic banking product is a product which is permissible to Muslims in accordance with their faith. But it does not prevent to be used by any non-Muslim. This is as simple as that. So if there is any supermarket, let me just give an example. Supermarket is selling alcohol also, they are selling mineral water also, they are selling Pepsi, Cola also, cold drinks also. Right? As long as they are selling the right product, as long as they are selling the halal product itself, and it does not contaminate with the other ones, there is no harm in keeping it. Similarly, the practitioners also. If Muhammad Tala is selling alcohol, it's not permissible. If Stella is selling Pepsi Cola or any water or anything, definitely that is the right thing. So just because of the religion or because of the nationality or any other thing, one particular thing does not become illegal or not permissible. So far as this thing is concerned, especially in the Morocco context, the best model that can work is that conventional bank should also have the window because it will be easier. They already have the setup, infrastructure, everything. All that they have to know is that they have to just import the know-how and the technology, and then they can carry forward. So far as the ambition of setting up a new entity is concerned, definitely option is there. A full-fledged Islamic bank can also grow up alongside, as they are working in other countries also, in all the GCC countries. You might be seeing that the full-fledged Islamic banks, as well as the conventional banks with the windows, they are all working in harmony. In fact, not only that, they are coordinating with each other. DDCAP, they have been very much instrumental from the beginning in managing the liquidity between the banks, and they have done a commendable job in this period itself. And she is a perfect example whereby there is a bridge and there is close coordination between conventional as well as Islamic banking, and both are working together. And there are so many syndications and other participation financing projects whereby conventional banks as well as Islamic banks, they are all working together in accordance with the Islamic principles itself. So to answer your question precisely, that yes, the best model will be that both Islamic windows as well as full-fledged Islamic banks should be allowed to function.
Thank you very much. I think it's very insightful indeed. The main, I think, or the keyword is contamination, I would say. So as far as we can make sure that both products, if they are offered by the same bank, if they are not contaminated, if the Islamic product doesn't get contaminated in the monetary circle or the circle of the bank, then it should be all right. We have seen examples of some countries, for example, Kazakhstan, who actually opted to have only Islamic banks or conventional banks, has actually seen a very big blow to their plans, because in the last 5-6 years, since they have passed this new law, there has been only one Islamic bank that was created, and even the growth of that bank is crippled because of the lack of interbank market, because of the lack of any buzz. And other Islamic banks, new Islamic banks were not incorporated because of the high capital requirements and a number of other regulatory issues as well. And the conventional banks, almost all of them, they want to go into Islamic, but they are not allowed to do this. So it has actually a very serious adverse impact on the market. I would like to ask Anas now, Monsieur Jaffal, si vous avez entendu les propos de Monsieur Talha, alors si vous voulez ajouter quelque chose avec un regard spécifique pour le Maroc, la communauté sharia, comment vous voyez et quel est le bon modèle en fait
C'est un élément très intéressant qui a été abordé ici. Vous allez tout revenir sur le point qui a été, dont M. Zahra a parlé. Donc en fait, ce qui nous intéresse quand on parle de produits financiers islamiques, c'est le produit en soi. C'est-à-dire que le produit soit conforme à la charia, soit commercialisé par une banque conventionnelle islamique. Donc il y a personne pour certifier que le cahier des charges est respecté, que le produit est bien charia compatible. C'est exactement la même chose. Donc je vais revenir sur ce point-là. Qui nous certifie que le produit est islamique. Comme on a pu voir dans le monde, on a deux modèles principaux de validation de charia qui se sont un peu démarqués. On a le modèle de charia banque centrale, on a pu le voir en Malaisie, donc le SAC, avec un seul charia board, la l'ensemble de l'opération charia du pays, avec bien sûr des interlocuteurs dans chacune des institutions financières. Puis on a le deuxième modèle, que l'on retrouve dans le Golfe, et aussi en Europe aujourd'hui, en France et en Grande-Bretagne, c'est celui des charia board privés. Chaque banque constitue son propre charia board qui valide ses opérations et puis ensuite la clientèle finale se fie à la valide de ce charia board pour consommer le produit. Donc ce que l'on a pu voir au Maroc dans l'amendement de la loi bancaire, c'est que ce qui est prévu, c'est d'avoir un comité charia pour la finance, donc une sorte de charia board central. Ce qu'on pense de cette chose, c'est une très bonne idée. Pourquoi? Parce que ça va nous permettre d'éviter de rentrer dans ce qu'on appelle dans le domaine de la concurrence charia. En fait, ce qui se pose comme problème parfois, c'est que certaines banques deviennent entre guillemets plus islamiques que d'autres parce qu'elles ont X ou Y dans leur charia board. Donc déjà ce problème va être réglé en ayant un charia board unique pour l'ensemble des opérations au Maroc. Cependant, il n'y a pas que il va falloir voir comment ces opérations sont traitées, quelle relation on va charia board avec les institutions financières de la place, mais aussi qui va constituer le charia board. Si on voit ce qui se passe en Malaisie, il n'y a pas uniquement des savants musulmans dans le charia board, on retrouve aussi des professionnels du marché, on retrouve aussi des universitaires, des gens qui ont des connaissances dans le monde de la finance. Et c'est très important de créer cet équilibre entre praticiens et savants charia pour permettre de faire avancer la validation charia dans le monde. La validation charia, puis aussi de permettre de suivre tout ce qui est évolution financière et innovation. Parce que certes, les charia board, les grands scholars ont aujourd'hui des connaissances dans le monde de la finance, mais les produits dérivés, les produits complexes, ça cesse d'évoluer. Il faut qu'il y ait quelqu'un pour servir d'interlocuteur entre les banquiers et les charia board qui ne parlent pas toujours le même langage.
Merci beaucoup. Stella, can I ask you to briefly take us through the journey that UK has taken from over the last 20 years, how things have evolved? I have been, telling the same story to Moroccan audience, I think, for some time. But it would be actually good to hear from somebody else, and also somebody who has been actually involved in a lot of some very fundamental, I think, initiatives where we have been and many cross-border collaborations, including the different MOU that have been signed between the UK and other countries. How it's helping all that, and also if you can tell us about your role in the Islamic Finance Task Force. What is this task force? Why it was set up? What is the objective of this task force? And also you can throw some light on the forthcoming World Islamic Economic Forum being held in London, the first time ever.
Sharia compliant bank to be authorised in 2004, which is Islamic Bank of Britain, which was a complex thing because it was not only a wholly Sharia compliant bank, but also one with a model that was focused entirely on consumer retail banking. So of course it immediately came to the attention of the regulatory authorities. But what people who are not quite as old as me have sort of forgotten is that actually we did have an Islamic bank in the UK back in the 1980s, which was called Al Baraka International, part of the Al Baraka group. It did have, it was wholly Sharia compliant, it was authorised as a bank, it wasn't active in the retail banking sector. However, it's fair to say that it found it impossible to operate within the UK regulatory legal environment, and ultimately Al Baraka handed back its licence to the authorities. At the same time, another initiative started in Copenhagen in Denmark back in the 80s. We had Islamic Bank International, which some people may be aware, others may not, was a tri-party venture between Kuwait Finance House, Al-Rajhi, and Dar al-Islami, I think. And Islamic Bank International, again, was there in Copenhagen trying to provide retail financial services, and again was thwarted by the local regulatory environment, also local law, and again ceased its operations. Neither of those, the closure of neither bank resulted in any loss to clients or any other significant negative impact other than inconvenience. So it shows you, if we go back some 20, 30 years, how very difficult it was. However, over that period, the UK has continued to be a centre for flows of Islamic finance, particularly in the wholesale space. Now, why would that be? Probably because the UK is one of the world's leading financial centres, if not the leading financial centre. Financial services today contributes £195 billion to GDP in the UK, so it's a big deal, a big thing. And traditionally, as Islamic banks were emerging and they key foothold, particularly in the GCC, they looked for counterparties, they looked for diversification, they looked for mechanisms that enabled them to move flows of funds, and a lot of those were found in the UK and in the European space as well. So what I'm saying to you is the risk of counterparties that appealed to Islamic institutions were predominantly large banks, large financial institutions that were actually conventional. So those banks and financial institutions enabled to transact with the emerging Islamic banks had to look at their own models, at their own financial services offerings, and ultimately had to agree that they would transact, as Mr. Talcott has been saying, in accordance with the Sharia stipulations of the new Islamic banks. And again, this was considerable. So if we look through the late 1990s, boom years, everybody doing rather well, lots of surplus, the attention came back to the UK again. And there had been work going on with the regulators and the authorities to provide support to license another bank in the UK that would be Sharia compliant and would provide services to British Muslims. And that came about, as I've just said, in 2004 with Islamic Bank of Britain. And similarly, because times were good and there was a lot of surplus, fairly soon after, there were a series of other authorisations. European Islamic Investment Bank, with shareholders predominantly from Bahrain and from the UAE. European Finance House, which is now called Cash Islamic Bank UK, because that's its shareholder. Bank of London and the Middle East, with predominantly Kuwaiti shareholders. Gatehouse Bank, predominantly Kuwaiti, where I also, through the start-up phase, served as an independent non-executive director at the behest of the regulators in the UK. Subsequently, we've gone on, more licenses have been issued, so we now have 6 wholly Sharia compliant banks. We have Abu Dhabi Islamic Bank as of this year as well, and as of a couple of months ago, we have our first Sharia compliant insurance writer, Cobalt Insurance Holdings, that has global capacity. So you can see that the market has moved onwards, but the premise of that has been about enabling Sharia compliant banks to work with other institutions that we have in the UK and globally, assuming always that the counterparty banks are willing to work within the stipulations of their Islamic bank counterparties. We have no separate regulatory code. Islamic institutions institutions are compelled to operate within the confines of the standard regulatory code in the UK. There have been changes to legislation over a 6-year period, and as I think Farouk said this morning, a lot of that has been rooted in taxation. We've had to look very carefully at taxation treatment, and the government has done so in the interests of making sure there's a level playing field, so nobody is adversely impacted by taxation that's not neutral or by different regulation. So we're getting there, but it's taken a long time. So just to finish up on where we are now. About 18 months ago, it was decided that the UK Islamic Financial Services Secretariat would be formed, and that was a body to bring industry, so both practicing Islamic finance or related services in the UK together with government. That's been fairly successful. We're focused not just on Islamic banking and finance, we're focused on Islamic education, we are focused on Islamic education, various different streams that are chaired by practitioners working within the industry. I know my colleague Farouk here is very involved in that as well on the education and qualification side. Moving on from the success of that initiative, in March of this year, the UK government decided that it would convene an Islamic finance task force. And the purpose of that is to champion Islamic finance in the UK, its development at government level. The government wants to show that in the UK we have an infrastructure and a platform within which Islamic finance can operate and can grow effectively. It's a level playing field. The government is quite clear. There are no inducements, there are no preferences to one financial system or another. We have to coexist, we have to work together. The Islamic Finance Task Force has 2 ministerial co-chairs, Baroness Warsi in the Foreign Office and also Greg Clark in the Treasury, and we are looking at how we can go forward and show that the UK can fully state its credentials as a hub for UK for Islamic finance globally. And also, of course, for British Muslims, and hopefully for those further afield too. And just to finish up on my little track here at Farouk's direction, at the end of October, London will be the first non-core Muslim city to host the World Islamic Economic Forum. It will be opened by our Prime Minister, David Cameron, and we expect to welcome a host of global leaders from Muslim countries and other interested nations. And this will be a huge event that runs over 3 days. It's focused on the Islamic economy. So we at London are honoured to be hosting this. Our ministers will be there and practitioner members of the task force such as me. And the very many other firms that we have in the UK. We have 20 conventional banks engaged in the provision of Islamic financial services other than the Islamic banks. We have over 25 legal and advisory firms that have a Sharia compliant capability. We have 4 professional institutes offering Islamic financial education and qualification, and a range of top-class universities as well that are offering undergraduate and postgraduate qualifications. So that will be the focus of the week. Not just finance, but the economy, halal food, education, and we will certainly embrace any visitors that we have from Morocco, and hopefully we will see you as London.
Thank you very much, Stella. I think it's very, very thankful. Thank you. Pour l'audience, alors vous avez vu, c'est en fait le grand événement de l'année, c'est le World Islamic Economic Forum. C'est un événement annuel en fait qui se tient dans les villes capitales du monde islamique, mais c'est la première fois en fait qu'on aura cet événement lieu, Inch'Allah, à Londres. Alors l'événement est un grand événement en fait parce qu'il y a plusieurs chefs d'État et chefs de gouvernement qui sont attendus et sera inauguré par notre Premier ministre, M. David Cameron. Et nous attendons en fait une bonne représentation du contingent marocain, Inch'Allah. Donc c'est à vous de voir alors comment participer, mais c'est vraiment quelque chose qui va apporter beaucoup d'opportunités au monde musulman. Je vais ouvrir la séance maintenant pour les questions et réponses. Juste une seconde, M. Jaffal, je voudrais juste revenir
dernière fois que ça a beaucoup utilisé la question level playing field. Je trouve que c'est très intéressant et c'est très important. C'est un point très important. Si on veut, si le Maroc veut se positionner en tant que hub de la finance islamique, s'il veut attirer les capitaux étrangers, s'il veut avoir des banques islamiques, il faut créer ce level playing field. On ne demande pas avoir un environnement comme l'environnement malaisien où les banques islamiques sont favorisées par rapport aux banques conventionnelles, mais seulement le level playing field. Il faut que les banques islamiques aient les mêmes conditions que les banques conventionnelles, qu'elles puissent commercialiser leurs produits dans les mêmes conditions. Si la France et l'Angleterre ont pu le faire à travers des dispositifs fiscaux, pourquoi est-ce que le Maroc ne pourrait pas? Ça, c'est un élément très important qu'il va falloir régler pour espérer avoir une industrie financière islamique saine dans le pays.
Merci. La question.
Bonjour. Donc, je suis Islamic, promoteur d'un projet en finance islamique et spécialement en microfinance. Je voudrais partager avec vous une réflexion. Donc, toujours dans le cadre avec la question des éléments sur lesquels le Maroc peut capitaliser en ce qui concerne l'expérience des autres pays. Alors, ma réflexion est la suivante. Nous avons l'impression, la tentation dans ce genre de manifestation de parler de la finance islamique comme étant une réussite exceptionnelle et que la finance islamique est là pour sauver l'humanité, une exception, une finance islamique qui est exempte de toute crise systémique, etc. etc. Moi, dans le cadre de cette réflexion et surtout du retour d'expérience des autres pays, est-ce qu'il n'y a pas des défis, des dysfonctionnements, des crises, des problèmes auxquels ces pays ont été exposés et que le Maroc est invité à éviter? Moi, par exemple, je donne tout simplement l'exemple du manque de transparence, d'un déficit de communication énorme de la part, je pense, de la part des principaux acteurs de la finance islamique de Parlement, le problème de transparence, le problème du focus qui est mis surtout sur le financement Moradaha, au lieu de basculer un petit peu bien, de faire une petite balance avec les produits de partage de risque, le fait de faire le focus aussi sur le financement des projets très importants et qui peut-être contribuent dans l'enrichissement des gens qui sont riches de par la planète, peut-être, au lieu de faire un petit peu de la balance avec le financement de la TPE, de la PME, etc. Et donc, est-ce qu'il n'y a pas de dysfonctionnement? Est-ce qu'il n'y a pas vraiment des leçons à tirer de par les expériences des autres pays? Merci.
Merci beaucoup. C'est une très bonne réflexion, en fait. My fellow speakers are okay, then can I answer the question?
Yes, sir.
Bon, moi je vais répondre à la question moi-même. Vous avez fait des bonnes remarques en fait. Je suis tout à fait en phase avec vous. Alors, jamais depuis ce matin, en fait, la finance islamique a été présentée de cette plateforme comme la solution pour l'humanité, comme quelque chose qui n'a pas de dysfonctionnement, qui est vraiment impeccable. Non, pas du tout. Alors, on a parlé tout à l'heure du problème qu'on a eu au Qatar, par exemple, où les agréments ont été révoqués par la Banque centrale, en fait, à cause du problème de transparence et tout, auprès des fenêtres islamiques. On a aussi parlé tout à l'heure de la loi sur le Kazakhstan, où, en fait, l'industrie locale a vu beaucoup d'obstacles dans son développement et dans sa croissance, etc. Donc, on n'est pas là pour faire la promotion de la finance islamique comme la solution pour tous les problèmes du monde.